And now, marine weather around Alaska. And we begin your marine weather segment with the Sea Ice Edge on this Monday, July 3rd. And the ice continues to gradually melt off here through the Beaufort Sea and the Chukchi Seas. We expect the open water to expand here, especially as it has through the lower Chukchi Sea, given that the fact we are in early summer, and this trend will only continue as the ice gradually melts off and continues to slowly recede to the north. For the Panhandle on Tuesday for marine weather, we are looking at a mixed bag of winds for the inner channels. South winds 10 knots, Lynn Canal waves a couple of feet. Variable winds 5 knots, waves a foot or two in Stevens Passage, and then down toward Ketchikan, Dixon entrance, northwest winds 15 knots. For the outer coastal areas, for the nearshore waters, look for southwest to west winds 10 to 15 knots off of Yakutat, Gustavus. 15 to 20 knot west-northwest winds as you go south of Sitka to off of Craig, waves generally running 4 or 5 feet. On Wednesday, winds will be northwesterly, Stevens Passage down through Dixon entrance at 10 to 15 knots, waves 2 to 3 feet. South winds continue with 2-foot waves in Lynn Canal. And then for the outer nearshore waters here of the coast, we expect winds generally northwest 20 to 25 knots with waves 5 to 7 feet, maybe as high as 8 feet there west of Craig. And for the northwestern Gulf, a mixed bag of winds, variable winds only 10 knots off of the Kenai. Southeast wind 10 knots within Prince William Sound, waves a foot or two there. Variable winds upper Cook Inlet and even down toward off of Anchor Point. But we expect winds southeasterly 25 knots there. Kennedy entrance at the entrance of Cook Inlet with waves 5 to 8 feet. And then on Wednesday, those winds at the entrance of Cook Inlet, 30 knots out of the east with waves of 8 to 9 feet. Variable winds back up toward Prince William Sound and south of Cordova between Kayak Island and Hinchinbrook entrance. And so that's where at least the lighter winds will be in the northern Gulf here on Wednesday. For Tuesday, Kodiak Island, south to southeast winds 25 knots, waves 4 to 6 feet, but winds pick up across the Alaska Peninsula in response to a occluded front working its way northeastward across the region. Waves running 8 to 11 feet on the North Pacific side and 7 to as high as 10 feet within the open waters of Bristol Bay. And for Wednesday, southeast to east winds 20 knots across Kodiak Island, generally southeast winds across the Alaska Peninsula, strongest off of Chiknik and also in through Bristol Bay as high as 30 knots. Waves in Bristol Bay again could still be upwards around 7-8 feet. And winds and waves generally further southwestward fall off a bit. Across the Aleutians, we had that low center on Tuesday south of Atka. And so being on the backside of the low, 35 to 40 knot gales near and west of Adak with waves as high as 15 to 16 feet there. And on Wednesday, the low works its way eastward and will be centered near Dutch Harbor in the eastern Aleutian, so lighter winds from the southeast and east there. But then on the backside of the low, northwest winds 25 to 30 knots west of Nikolsky through Atka, with waves as high as 9 to 11 feet, especially on the Bering side. And winds on Tuesday, southeast 30 knots in Bristol Bay and easterly out of Kuskokwim Bay with waves 7 to as high as 10 feet. South winds along the lower Yukon Delta and up into Norton Sound at 15 knots, waves 3 to 4 feet there. And Wednesday, look for southeast winds 20 to 25 knots there along areas outside of Kuskokwim and Bristol Bays, waves 5 to 7 feet. Easterly flow, offshore flow out of Norton Sound and the Yukon Delta at 15 knots and waves running 2 to 3 feet. And then across the far north, east winds 10 to 15 knots, Prudhoe Bay to Kaktovik. Look for more of a south-southwest wind, Cape Lisburn up to Utqiagvik at 15 knots. And then a mixed variety of winds coming down through the lower Chukchi Sea at 10 to 15 knots, with waves running 2 to 3 feet in the open water there. And for Wednesday, winds will generally be southwest to west, 15 to 20 knots from Cape Lisburn to Kaktovik, where there is some open water, waves 3 to 4 feet, and then coming down through the lower Chukchi Sea that has open water and the Bering Strait, south winds anywhere from 10 to 15 knots, waves running 3 to 4 feet, but winds turn northeasterly off of the Seward Peninsula and on the north side of St. Lawrence Island around 10 knots with easterly offshore flow out of Norton Sound at 15 knots. So here's that area of low pressure on Tuesday afternoon south of the central Aleutians with an occluded front arcing out ahead of it north and eastward. And on Wednesday, the low afternoon, it'll be centered over the eastern Aleutians with the occluded front weakening, pushing further up across the southwest interior and on up the west side of the Alaska Range. Ridge of high pressure will build out over the eastern Gulf and over the Panhandle, and this is going to allow much warmer temperatures to set up, especially Thursday, Friday, Saturday. We're looking at some 70s and 80s over the Panhandle with warmer temperatures there in the southeast.